covering recruiting and the transfer portal for the Razorbacks. This is Inside Arkansas Recruiting with Dudley Dawson.
All right. Well, welcome to a special edition of Inside Recruiting with Dudley Dawson. Excited about today's episode. We're going to do a little business recruiting with college football writer Brandon Marcello, who has done a lot in his days since he got out of college. Been in Arkansas, covered several different SEC schools. Is now one of the most preeminent sports voices out there with college football. Brandon, thanks for jumping on.
Hey, no problem. I'm one of the voices. I'm not prominent. I'm one of the voices.
I said preeminent, you know.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate that, Dudley. Thank you very much.
It's two former Northwest Arkansas Times reporters, and newspaper is no longer there, but hey, great memories from the start.
Building's still there.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk with you right off the bat was I know there were probably coaches, players, and certainly recruiting writers were thrilled with the notion that there's only going to be one portal period, or at least that's what's up for vote on October 1st, January 2nd to January 10th. Talk to me a little bit about what you think about that and just what you're hearing from coaches.
Yeah, this started developing about a year ago. We started hearing word that the AFCA was pushing this across to communicate with the coaches. The coaches immediately kind of grabbed on it, said, yeah, this is what we want. But what's interesting about all of it is that, back a few months ago, several of the conferences wanted the January period, January 2nd through 11th, but Big Ten coaches weren't so keen on it. They wanted to do something in the spring, partially because, as some people may not know, the spring semester calendar is much different at a lot of Big Ten schools. A lot of Big Ten schools, especially out west, now that they're in the Big Ten, are on the quarter system. And so their calendar is a lot different. So they were thinking, you know what, let's do this at the end of spring, maybe at the end of spring practices. But they were kind of the lone holdout. And so this got pushed across finally. I think it'll end up getting that final approval by the administrative committee. But, it's interesting. Just recently, in fact, Ohio State coach Ryan Day came out and said he was against the January signing period and is very vehement about it, doesn't like it. So, we'll see where this goes, but everybody wants one portal window. It's just, there was some, disagreement about where to put it, but most people wanted it in January.
And that December one seemed to cause most problems for maybe teams that weren't necessarily playing in January bowls, the top bowls, and I could be in the playoffs and all that. That seemed to be a lot of verbiage coming from coaches that in that situation, it certainly is one thing to be going to bowl practices, getting ready for a bowl, also recruiting. I know around here that certainly was, a problem. Did you hear that from a lot of other coaches?
Yeah, and in fact, you also have to remember that now because of the playoff, a lot of teams aren't just preparing for one bowl, they're preparing for multiple games. And that's why Ryan Day was very much against this date because, the national championship game is not until January 19th. So you're looking at that all going on while they're playing in a playoff game. And obviously it doesn't mean, Ohio State's not going to be allowed to recruit. In fact, I think they get like an extra 5-day window after their season ends if you're in the playoff. But still, you're not able to focus all your energy on that while some other programs are. And I know some people go, well, boo-hoo, you're in the national championship game. You can't go recruit as much hard as you want. But that's always been an issue. I mean, you heard the stories about Nick Saban being so upset sometimes playing in the national championship game the next morning, like not even wanting to celebrate because he was missing out on recruiting. But this is the best fix. Having that thing in December was just absolutely chaotic, especially the dates on it. It's just, it was dumb. It was dumb to begin with, I thought. I don't know why they even considered doing that. But to me, this January situation was what makes the most sense. Like, if this is going more to the professional model, I mean, just start it everything in January. When we're talking about, your paydays, your new contracts for these players, you go for an entire, don't go for the academic year, go for a calendar year, because the season ends in November, December. I think it also opens the opportunity for players to potentially work out like temporary deals if they make it into the playoff and make a run, because a lot of these deals may not include, hey, you might play an extra three games or 4 games if you're in your conference championship. So I think January to me just made the most sense.
I want to talk with you a little bit about the NIL and the bags, as they say these days, later in the segment. But going back to the transfer portal, when I first heard it, I thought, hey, that sounds pretty cool. You'll get to transfer and not have to sit out, and everything will be cool. And then your TJ Finleys and others started bouncing all over the place. Just your thoughts on how it was implemented, and then how they had to do or try to do a quick correction, because these guys are now in connection with the NIL, with their agents, seeking out the best job.
Yeah, and they're still trying to fix that from the standpoint of this new College Sports Commission. With their first idea was in a lot of ways, without actually being written down, to be able to just we're just pretty much going to outlaw these organizations with NIL deals, as far as I just should say the NIL collectives themselves. They've had to backtrack on that because they've already faced legal challenges. I think in fact the CSC was in business for 5 days before they started having to backtrack on that stuff. But they have made it tougher. They haven't cleared every deal that's come through. A lot of them are still kind of in limbo. I think the last numbers I saw was 80% of deals have been approved, but there's multi-million-dollar deals that have still not been approved. They're under review, and that's because a lot of these are deals that you might consider, potentially pay for play deals instead of just actual sponsorship deals like with Nike or whatever. But I think, listen, in college sports, there's always been a way around the rules. A lot of people bend them. A lot of people just break them. But everybody, I think, is doing it to certain extent. That's why the roles of even NIL collectives, you've seen their mission statements even change from month to month to month, so they can kind of maneuver and slide itself around in the new NCAA structure so it's legal, and that'll continue to happen. It'll be fascinating to see what the next generation of NIL collectives is like. When the NIL collectives first started, I immediately thought of them almost in a political sense, as a super PAC. We're just going to fund whatever we need, however we get it, to this program, to our athletics department. And that's pretty much what it is. But now they're saying, all right, show us the receipts. Show us that this is, you're actually getting a return on your investment. And you can't just say, well, we're using their name, image, and likeness on our Twitter accounts. Yeah, that's not worth, $900,000, but even if NIL were to go away, these NIL collectives, you would still have, McDonald's bags of money hanging out in some of these dormitories.
The political implications of this, when it first started coming along, I thought, they'll, keep government out of things, but they tried to jump in a little bit. But I've always said that it seemed like the state of Arkansas and the University of Arkansas had a problem with getting going with theirs. Did you see a lot of schools that were just behind in terms of that, and it knocked them even further down the SEC chain, the Big Ten chain, Arkansas being one of them?
Yeah, some of them were behind. Some of them were so anxious to jump into it, it was chaotic. So example for the University of Florida, they had several NIL collectives that were almost battling against each other, and no one was on the same page. And it actually hurt them for the first year and a half or so, even though they were trying to be on the forefront of things. They were one of the first universities or not universities, but one of the first organizations to form an NIL collective. And then 1 or 2 more popped up, and then there wasn't an official one, and they're all doing different things. You look at, like you said, Arkansas, programs like that were slow to create one. But also what was interesting about that is that Arkansas was one of the few states that were on the forefront with their NIL laws, with kind of opening things up and being a little bit more lenient. Those states that really, I think in the SEC, mostly in the SEC for that matter, that were the best laws that had helped players and could have helped their programs were Arkansas, Missouri, and Georgia, which again, it makes me wonder, like, was Arkansas communicating with the legislators and trying to take advantage of that with their own NIL collective? There seemed to be a disconnect there, even though they were helping get stuff across the political line to put Arkansas in a very advantageous spot. Missouri's taking advantage of it. Georgia's taking advantage of it. And I don't think Arkansas has done a very good job of taking advantage of the tools that the legislatures have given them here in the last couple of years.
Last question in this first segment, whether it be KJ Jefferson staying here before transferring to wait to get that final check, or the Nico and Madden Imalava, now those schools are trying to get the money back, or at least tried and all that. Did you see these problems coming along? And I kind of did, because, if you're not playing, if you're not getting what you thought you were doing, not getting the time, somebody was always upset at our work. Surely they're going to get upset in football.
Oh, yeah. I think everybody kind of saw this coming, and that's why you saw a lot of these contracts, especially the ones drawn up by Blueprint Sports, which runs or helps run Arkansas's NIL Collective and a lot of others. And they started putting, quote unquote, almost like buyout clauses in those. Then you had lawyers that were on the players' side saying, well, these aren't actually legal, considering this, this, and this. Of course, all that's going to be settled in the court of law if they end up going to court with those things. Specifically about, Madden Maliava, this just tells you everybody's got hands in both pockets, right? So Blueprint Sports, reps Arkansas. It also reps UCLA. So like, what are we doing these days? But the only real way to fix any of this is to do some sort of collective bargaining. And that's like 20 bridges down the road for whatever reason. And most of that's political. There's too many political roadblocks. The ADs, the commissioners don't want it for obvious reasons, because they don't want to get into that whole terminology of, well, do we need to consider them employees? Does this mean they're going to strike? Are we going to potentially have a holdout season? Because I've been told by people who have formed, the athletes organization, athletes.org, they call it, the National Collegiate Players Association, where they're trying to get everybody together. Like, they tell all the kids that are interested in forming a union or an organization for collective bargaining that, okay, my first question to you is, are you ready to strike? Are you ready to go on strike and not be paid for a year? Because if you're not, you can't join this organization, because you are going to have to be willing to do that at some point. It might not happen with you in your 4 or 5 years out in college, but at some point it's going to happen. Every organization has a strike if there's a union of some sort. And I think that's very difficult for a lot of the players to wrap their heads around. So again, a lot of roadblocks, political, the bosses in charge, and then also the players themselves when they're told, hey, this is the reality of it. And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Very difficult situation. And again, that's why college sports has always been like the Wild West in a lot of ways, because you could just never get anybody on the same page. There's too many universities, too many different factors.
I want to thank again GoatLab, original GoatLab in Lowell, GoatLab Red in Fayetteville, having a lot of fun there in football games these days. Looking forward to stopping by there pretty soon. The second segment, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Arkansas Ole Miss dynamic. Ole Miss has done a great job recruiting. You have to say that they were ahead of the game, getting the bags out or getting the money to the players, reaching the contracts. Arkansas, as we said, in the first segment, was a little behind. But I think it's been even more grating on Arkansas fans that many Arkansas players have transferred to Ole Miss. When you see that, and that's what I guess that's just one of the things that the transfer portal brought about.
Yeah, I mean, and you see several schools where similar things have happened, where 2 or 3 players will end up going to the same school. They'll leave and go out. For them to go to a rival, so to speak, in your own conference, a little bit more rare. And I'm sure that irks Arkansas fans. And let's face it, the Razorbacks, you combine the last 2 years, they've had the most transfers out of their program than any SEC team. And, that automatically raises either red flags or at least questions of why is that happening, right? And then you add an extra, spice to the soup, so to speak, of, well, several of them went to Ole Miss, and then like you've got fans and other people saying, well, Ole Miss is very blatant with this, like maybe they were tampering or whatever. The problem is it's like no one's able to really like prove tampering, and then also coaches are hesitant to report things because they don't want to get in trouble themselves at some point, because let's face it, to a certain extent, whether the coaches are doing it or outside parties are not even aware of, there's tampering going on all the time. And we've heard stories about players, even after games, the opposing coaches, and you can see it on film at other schools, I'm not naming schools here, where they're talking to the players after the game, and then you hear 3 months later that they're in the portal and they're really talking to that team. And you're wondering, well, they bent their ear 2-3 months ago after the game. What's going on there? But the big issue is just the player agents. A lot of these guys, the player agents are, obviously not certified. Some of these guys were selling shoes on eBay just a few weeks ago, and then they have a buddy who's an athlete and they end up repping them, right? And that's irritating to the coaches too, because they're literally dealing with people who have no idea what they're talking about, and they're just throwing dollar figures out at the coach and their reps, and they're just like, this is a headache. I don't know how to deal with someone like this. There are things that I think that could be done quickly to help remedy some of this, which doesn't involve collective bargaining, which is so many legal hurdles. There should be a centralized system to certify agents. So if you're a player and you're going like NIL collectives, for example, or even the universities themselves, now they're doing revenue sharing, I think they could do this. I think legally they could do it just university by university. Like if you want to play at the University of Arkansas, your agent has to be certified with this centralized location or whatever. The NCAA should step in and do that. The CSC, whatever, they need to step in and do that. I think that would help alleviate a lot of the headaches that these coaches and general managers deal with. And it would make it a little bit more professional, since, we're already in that realm anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's gone, back when we were first starting out writing, you just go to the SID and get to have an individual interview with the player. Now you have to go through the SID, the lawyer, the agent, and then they want money for the interview. It's just a strange time. Brings me to another question, the rev share, which, I think they're calling it. When everybody heard that, oh, great, there's going to be $20 million to pay, in the player pool and manage the salary cap and all that. And instead, we see people getting fired and people still talking about not getting enough money. Your thoughts on that?
It's always the low men on the totem pole who pay, right? And it's happening in athletic departments across the country. They're laying off the support staff workers, whether they're SIDs or people who work in the office, help create graphics, or they're out there even running, paper in the press box, or the folks that are helping, with the football team itself, working long hours, underpaid maybe already, and they're the ones getting cut. It's not the people with making the bigger paydays. And that's happening everywhere. I know a lot of people freaked out when OU did it, when Texas did it, but even before that, Texas A&M, I think, was really the first program to do it. They laid off, I think, something like 15% of their staff right when Trev Alberts got hired, like within 2 weeks. And they're like, oh boy, he came here with an axe, and they told him to use it. And that stuff's going to continue. Back in as of August 1st, we had 41 Olympic sports cut across the NCAA to save money at schools. And, that's all levels. Doesn't sound like a lot when you consider there's hundreds of schools, but that's just the beginning. I mean, every athletic director I talk to just won't rule out the possibility that here in the next 5 years, they might have to cut a program of some sort that is just hemorrhaging money, and they just can't afford it anymore. Because you can only make so many cuts before you cease to be able to operate as a business on the level in which you want to operate. I mean, heck, Trev Alberts himself at Texas A&M, one of the richest athletics departments in the country, said to me last May, a year and a half ago, I guess now, that he could not look his coaches in the eyes and tell them, hey, we're not going to cut your sport in the future. He says anybody who tells you that is lying, because you cannot promise that in this new age. And that's going to be the next step here in the next couple of years, because it's one thing for these numbers to be projected out, the budgets to be projected out, But when you actually see it in the final report at the end of the year, and hey, we don't have money, we're having to borrow money, we have to pull this and pull that, and we're not getting the new revenue streams we were hoping for with field sponsorships and all that stuff. When that becomes reality, then you're going to go, well, now we have to consider this. We have to consider cutting this. And that's the next big thing, I think, to me, is the potential for us seeing some programs cut, and not just at FCS level or D2 level, but in the FBS level.
One last question, and I appreciate you taking some time. General managers, never thought I'd see that in college athletics. Arkansas hired Remy Caulfield from the Boston Celtics, the 2024 NBA champion. But talk to me a little bit about, do you see these teams using this right? I mean, we can't get a lot of answers out of Arkansas per se on what they're doing. I'm told that Ole Miss does a really good job with their GM. What have you seen out of that position, and is it going to become a staple?
What's funny about it? It's becoming a staple, but it's also the job description varies pretty much at every school. Some general managers are acting like general managers you see in the NFL. They're running the front office. They've got people scouting players, keeping tabs on the transfer portal, looking at players playing on Saturdays, even going, well, if this guy enters the portal, that's someone we identify. Then you have other general managers that are pretty much just like the right-hand man of the head coach, and the head coach tells them what to do depending on which way the wind's blowing that day. I think one program that's doing it very well right now from a general manager standpoint is Oklahoma. They hired the Senior Bowl executive director, Jim Nagy, who has worked in front offices in the NFL already, and he got on the ground, boots on the ground, and was running full speed this offseason, getting players on that campus to revamp and turn that program completely around. I mean, they couldn't do anything offensively last year. I remember sitting next to a longtime OU reporter in the press box when they played Tennessee and Tennessee shut them down, telling me that first half of football was the worst half of OU football he's ever seen before. They had negative rushing yards. And then now you step forward and you got John Mateer at quarterback. You're scoring points at will. You're beating Michigan at home by double digits. You can flip and change a roster overnight. And some programs do that by leaning on an actual general manager as you would see it and term it in the NFL. But I still think that I guess I could compare it to this. Some programs are still kind of going the Jerry Jones approach, where the owner's not necessarily the GM, but it's the head coach. The head coach is just like, I want to control everything. So if we have a GM, they're more or less like a player personnel guy. They're not necessarily a GM. Heck, Georgia and Kirby Smart, they don't even have a GM, and they keep getting the kids they want because they're Georgia and their process has worked. We'll see if that continues, but it differs at every university. It's not like the NFL where every GM you kind of know does pretty much similar things. It's not like that in college football.
Well, man, we were colleagues a long time ago. I've been very proud of what you've done in your career, and you are one of the preeminent voices of college football now. Happy to know you, and thanks for stopping on.
Yeah, thanks, Dudley. And I don't know if this is on air or not, but every time someone talks to me, they're like, where's your influences? I always say when I was in high school, I read Dudley Dawson every day when he had an article or especially columns every now and again. I read his basketball coverage like crazy. So, I mean, you've been a big influence on my life. And yeah, thank you, Dudley. Appreciate you, man.
Well, I appreciate that from you, and we'll get together at a Grove comedy show pretty soon.
Yes.
Really enjoyed having Brandon on. As I said, he's got a lot of knowledge about college football. He's worked hard and gotten to a point to where he is one of the preeminent guys in college football. Before we get out of here today, just wanted to encourage everybody to have a great week. One of my favorite sayings is yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. Go out and do something with it to make the world a better place.